The wind carried dust and shame when Eli Navarro pressed his daughter's trembling hand into the grip of a stranger trading her for a map rumored to lead to hidden gold. It was late afternoon. The sky streaked with the colors of rust and fire when the deal was struck. The town of Larkspur had no church bells, no gentle voices to soften the hour, only the squeal of a dry wind through warped shutters and the groan of horses tied restless at the hitching post. The saloon doors banged open and shut, carrying with them the laughter of men who thrived on whiskey and misfortune. Somewhere, a dog barked. Sharp and hollow. 17-year-old Marisol Navarro stood at her father's side, her thin shoulders hunched beneath a faded shawl, her braid heavy with desert dust. She had never felt so small in all her life. Her father's hand was tight on her arm, his fingers bruising her skin, as if she were nothing more than a sack of flour he was handing over. The man who waited for her was unlike any she had ever seen. Kellen stood tall, shoulders broad, his long black hair tied back except for one streak dyed the color of blood, a mark that gave him his name, the Red Hawk. His clothing carried the dust of travel, his boots scuffed, his rifle slung across his back as naturally as a man wore a second skin. His eyes dark, steady, unreadable, studied Eli Navarro with no respect, and Marisol with something else entirely. Eli spat into the dirt, his voice thick with greed. "Here's my girl. You'll take her. I'll take the map. Fair as any trade, I'd say." The crowd that had gathered in the street muttered, some shaking their heads, others whispering. In the Old West, men traded cattle, land, even their own freedom when debts ran high. But a daughter? A daughter for gold? That was something else. That was a kind of poverty deeper than empty pockets. Marisol wanted to scream. She wanted to claw her father's face, to beg the crowd to see her, to take her away. But no one moved. Not the shopkeeper leaning on his broom. Not the blacksmith wiping soot from his hands. Not the preacher who stood with his Bible closed tight against his chest. Not one dared to step forward. Eli pulled a weathered slip of parchment from the inner pocket of the stranger's coat. A map, brittle with age, its ink faded but still legible. His eyes lit up like a drunkard staring at a full bottle. Kellen did not move. His jaw worked once slow, as if grinding down a thought too sharp to swallow. Then, at last, he extended his hand, not to Eli, but to Marisol. Her breath caught. The crowd leaned closer. His touch was warm, steady. But it wasn't the touch of a man claiming property. It was the touch of a man receiving a burden he had not asked for but would not abandon. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and calm, the kind of voice that carried more weight than a shout. "She is not yours to trade," he said. Eli laughed, harsh and ugly. "Everything's for trade, warrior. Everything has a price. You'll see soon enough." Kellen's eyes narrowed, but he did not answer. Instead, he shifted Marisol gently behind him, shielding her from her father's greedy stare. In that moment, with the sun burning low and the dust stinging her eyes, Marisol understood something that cut sharper than any blade. Her father had not traded her away out of desperation, but out of choice, out of pure, uncheckable greed. The map disappeared into Eli Navarro's pocket. The crowd began to scatter, whispering, some casting glances of pity, others shaking their heads as if washing their hands of the whole cursed exchange. The saloon doors creaked shut. The dog stopped barking. For one strange, heavy moment, it was only Marisol Kellen and the weight of a choice that could never be undone. The warrior glanced down at her, his gaze unreadable but unflinching. She expected cruelty or hunger or indifference. Instead, she saw something she did not recognize, something steadier than the dust, something stronger than the shame. Her father had traded her for gold, but Kellen's silence told her something. She would only later come to understand. He had not taken a daughter in trade. He had taken on a promise. The desert night came quickly, swallowing the town of Larkspur in shadows. But the deal still burned like a brand in Marisol's chest. She sat stiff on the back of Kellen's horse, clutching the reins though he guided the animal with one sure hand. Her father's figure was long gone behind them, swallowed into whiskey dreams and the promise of gold. And for the first time in her life, Marisol understood what it meant to be abandoned. She had been traded like a sack of grain. The only sound was the steady thud of hooves and the occasional distant howl of coyotes. Every creak of leather, every rustle of Kellen's movements beside her made her heart pound harder. She expected the worst harsh words, cruel orders, hands that claimed her as his property. That's what the townsfolk's whispers had told her. That's what her father had believed. But Kellen was silent. They rode until the moon was high and silver, until the air grew sharp with desert chill. At last he pulled the horse to a stop near a cluster of cottonwoods beside a shallow stream. Without looking at her, he dismounted, tied the reins, and began to gather wood. Marisol sat frozen in the saddle, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, teeth chattering with fear as much as with cold. When he returned with an armful of sticks, she flinched. Kellen crouched low, building a fire with deliberate care. Sparks leapt, catching dry grass, until the flames grew tall enough to chase the darkness back. He sat across from her, shadows flickering across his broad chest and the glint of the tribal beads around his neck. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, his voice came low, steady, like a drumbeat carried by the earth itself. Eat. He tossed her a piece of fry bread wrapped in cloth. Marisol stared at it, suspicious. Her stomach growled, but her pride burned hotter. She did not move. Why? She whispered, her voice trembling. Why feed me, when she couldn't finish. The shame choked her. Kellen's gaze softened, though his face was still carved in stone. Because you are not cattle, not property. Your father was blind. He traded gold for you. His eyes held hers, unyielding, but he did not see. He gave me something more valuable. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the words were impossible. No one had ever spoken of her as valuable, not even her father, who had once called her a burden when the crops failed. Kellen reached into the small pouch at his belt and pulled out a feather dyed red at the tip. He held it close to the firelight, letting it shimmer in the glow. In my people's tongue, a red hawk flies not for greed, but for protection. My name is Kellen, but men call me Red Hawk. I do not take slaves, I take guardianship. Marisol clutched the fry bread now, her hands trembling. Guardianship? He nodded once, slow and sure. You are under my protection. The words hung heavy in the air, sinking deep into the marrow of her bones. For the first time since she had been shoved toward him in the dusty street, Marisol let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders sagged. The tears she'd been fighting welled up, but she forced them back. Unwilling to cry in front of him, Kellen looked away, staring into the fire as if reading something in the flames. Your father's map will bring him nothing but sorrow. Greed poisons men quicker than whiskey. He gave you away for lines on paper. Foolish. Blind. He will learn. Marisol swallowed hard. And what about me? What will I become now? Kellen turned back to her. In the flickering firelight, his expression was unreadable, yet his voice carried a quiet certainty. You will not become anything you are not meant to be. You are free now. The world will still hunt you because of his choice. But if they come for you, they will find me. The night pressed close around them. Coyotes yipped in the distance, the river trickled low, and the fire crackled as if it carried secrets. Marisol sat by the fire, staring into the flames, unsure whether she should feel safer or more afraid. But one truth nestled deep inside her. Undeniable as the stars above, Kellen was not her father, and though he could have claimed her, he had instead offered something she had never been given: protection without chains. The days that followed were carved from silence and dust. Marisol traveled beside Kellen across the wide, open land where the sky seemed too large, too heavy for any one soul to bear. The desert was an endless canvas painted with iron-red cliffs, bone-white dry riverbeds, and sagebrush clinging stubbornly to the earth. At night, the stars stretched across the heavens like 1,000 watchful eyes, and she often wondered if they pitied her or judged her, or both. Kellen rode with the calmness of a man who belonged to this land. He spoke little, but when he did, it was never wasted breath. Marisol studied him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way his eyes scanned the horizon like a hawk, the way his hand never strayed far from his rifle, the way his bare chest gleamed with sweat beneath the relentless sun. He was both man and weapon, carved by hardship and sharpened by necessity. And yet, he was not cruel. He offered her water before he drank himself. He stopped when her legs trembled from walking too far. He did not bind her wrists, though he easily could have. Still, Marisol's heart warred with itself. Fear lingered in every step, her father's betrayal echoing in her mind. The memory of Eli Navarro's greedy grin, his calloused hand pushing her forward, his voice calling her trade, burned hotter than the desert sun. She wanted to hate Kellen for being part of it, but each day made hatred harder to hold onto. One evening, as the sun bled down the horizon and the sky turned the color of fire and ash, they stopped in a canyon hollow. The air was heavy with the smell of mesquite smoke as Kellen built a small fire. Marisol sat across from him, pulling her shawl close, trying to gather her thoughts into something that resembled strength. At last, she broke the silence. "Why? Didn't you send me back?" Kellen glanced at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. He did not answer right away. He seemed to measure every word, as though language was a blade to be drawn only when necessary. Finally, he said, "Because men would hunt you. Not for who you are, but for what your father did." Her brow furrowed. "Hunt me?" Kellen leaned forward, tossing another branch into the fire. Sparks climbed into the night like restless spirits. Your father's trade was not quiet. Word spreads. There are men who believe gold can be smelled like blood, and men who believe a girl traded for a map must be worth more than either. He looked at her, steady, unwavering. "If I left you, you would not last the week." The truth hit her like a blow to the chest. She swallowed, gripping her shawl tighter, a mixture of fear and something else, something that unsettled her more than fear. Gratitude still. She pressed on. "And what of you? Why risk yourself for me?" Kellen's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting back to the fire. "Because I have seen enough taken, enough broken." His voice dropped low, almost a whisper carried by the crackle of flames. "Not again, not while I breathe." The silence that followed was not empty, it was filled with the weight of unspoken pasts. Marisol stared at him, wondering what he had lost, who he had failed, and why he carried her fate now as though it were carved into his bones. She wanted to ask, but something in his eyes warned her not to pry. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, "You fight for me as though I matter." Kellen turned his head sharply, meeting her gaze. His face was shadowed, his features fierce, but his words were steady as stone. "Because you do." Marisol felt something twist inside her chest, unfamiliar and frightening. For years she had been little more than her father's burden, the daughter who ate more than she was worth, the girl who could be bartered away for paper promises. And now, here was a warrior, a stranger, saying she mattered. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. Marisol hugged her knees close, staring into the flames. trying to reconcile the two worlds, the one her father had condemned her to, and the one Kellen now offered. The desert around them was painted in blood and dust, but here, in the circle of firelight, she felt something she had never known before. Safety. And though she did not yet trust it, she clung to it as the only thing keeping her heart from breaking entirely. In towns like Larkspur, gossip rode faster than any horse. By the time Eli Navarro stumbled into the saloon clutching his brittle map, half the territory already buzzed with talk of gold hidden somewhere in the canyons. Eli slammed the parchment onto the bar, sloshing whiskey from the glasses of men too drunk to care about manners. "Here it is," he crowed, voice thick with liquor and pride. "The path to more gold than any of you sorry bastards will ever see in 10 lifetimes." The saloon went quiet for half a heartbeat. Then came the whispers, the greedy grins, the sharp-eyed stares of men who had killed for less. They leaned in, cowboys with scars across their jaws, drifters with 6-shooters hanging low, men with the kind of hunger that no amount of gold could satisfy. Eli didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't care. He was too drunk on the promise of treasure, too blind to realize that maps were worth killing over. And men had already noticed that he carried something worth more than his life. Outlaws began to follow him. Shadows trailed his boots from one dusty street to the next, whispers curling like smoke in every doorway. Back in the canyon, Kellen knew before word reached his ears. He read it in the land, in the shifting winds, in the sudden silence of birds that should have been singing. Danger had a scent like iron and dust, and it clung to the air around them. Marisol noticed the change in him, too. The way his eyes sharpened toward the horizon, the way his hand rested more often on the rifle at his side. Even the horse moved restless, as though sensing the weight of unseen predators. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the desert turned the color of bruised skin, Kellen spoke at last. "The map is cursed." Marisol frowned, pulling her shawl tighter. "Cursed? You mean because it leads to death?" He shook his head, stirring the fire with a branch until sparks climbed into the night. His bare shoulders glowed in the shifting light, the tribal beads at his neck casting tiny shadows across his chest. "Not cursed in the way preachers speak, cursed because it blinds men. They forget food, water, even family. They see nothing but gold. And when they do," he dropped the branch into the flames. "Blood follows." Marisol thought of her father, his hands shaking with greed, his eyes wild as he tucked the map into his coat. "So the gold will destroy him?" Kellen's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. "It already has." She flinched. The words were true. Her father had traded her away for parchment, and no man who could do that had any soul left to lose. The silence between them grew heavy, broken only by the cry of a lone owl. Marisol shifted closer to the fire, her voice low. "And what about us? Will they come for us too?" "They will," Kellen said simply. The finality in his voice made her chest tighten. She hugged her knees, her mind racing with images of faceless men in the dark, guns drawn, blood staining the desert sand. Kellen leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "But let them come. They will not take you. Not while I live." His words should have frightened her, but instead they wrapped around her like a shield. He wasn't boasting, he was promising. Still, fear lingered. Marisol could not stop the thought from slipping out. "And if you fall?" Kellen was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. Then, with a faint, grim smile, he said, "Then I will fall standing in front of you." The flames crackled, carrying his words into the night air like embers, and Marisol felt tears sting her eyes. She turned her face away quickly, not wanting him to see, but the warmth in her chest was undeniable. Her father had chosen greed. The outlaws would choose blood. But Kellen had chosen her, and whether that meant salvation or ruin, Marisol did not yet know. All she knew was this: the map had cursed her father, but it had also given her something she never thought possible in a world painted with blood and dust, someone who believed she was worth protecting. The attack came at dusk, when the canyon walls glowed red like the edges of a dying fire. Marisol heard at first the faint jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men's voices carried on the wind. She froze, clutching her shawl, her heart pounding, as though it wanted to break free from her chest. The campfire flickered quietly, mocking her fear with its false warmth. Kellen had already heard them. She saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hand slipped silently toward the rifle, lying across the rocks. His long black hair stirred in the breeze, the crimson streak burning like a flame in the fading light. Without a word, he reached out and pushed Marisol gently behind a boulder. "Stay low," he whispered. His voice was steady, as if danger was an old companion he knew too well. Marisol crouched behind the rock, clutching the fabric of her skirt so tightly her knuckles whitened. She tried not to breathe, tried not to move, but her eyes darted over the edge. Shadows shifted at the canyon's mouth. Men, half a dozen at least, crept closer, rifles in hand, their faces hard with hunger for gold. One of them called out, his voice echoing against the stone. "We know you've got the girl, Red Hawk, and we know about the map. Hand him over, and maybe we let you live." Kellen rose slowly from the firelight, his chest bare, muscles glistening with sweat in the last rays of sunset. He looked every bit the warrior they had whispered about, unshakable, dangerous, carved from the land itself. His voice rang clear, firm as iron. "You will take nothing here." The outlaws laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Gunfire cracked a heartbeat later, sparks flying off the rocks near Kellen's head. Marisol gasped, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. Kellen moved like the hawk whose name he carried. In one fluid motion, he dropped to one knee, raised his rifle, and fired. The canyon exploded with thunder. One outlaw spun and fell, his gun clattering to the ground. The others roared and charged, bullets ricocheting off stone, the air thick with smoke and grit. The sharp tang of gunpowder filled Marisol's nose, stinging her eyes. She crouched lower, her heart racing, every crack of a rifle shaking her bones. Kellen fought with a calm savagery, each shot measured, each movement deliberate. He shifted behind cover, reloaded swiftly, and fired again. The echoes bounced from wall to wall, making it sound as though 100 rifles screamed in the canyon. Marisol risked a glance and saw him shirtless, muscles straining, beads and bone ornaments swaying as he moved, his hair whipping around his face. He looked less like a man and more like a storm, given flesh. But storms bleed too. She saw the moment it happened. A bullet grazed his shoulder, ripping flesh, staining his skin with crimson. He staggered but did not fall. Instead, he grit his teeth, raised his rifle, and dropped another man where he stood. Marisol's hand shook. She wanted to run to him, to press her shawl against the wound, to do anything, but fear rooted her in place. All she could do was watch, her breath ragged, as the canyon became a graveyard of echoes and dust. Finally, the last outlaw screamed and fled, his boots pounding against stone as he vanished into the darkening desert. Silence followed, heavy and sharp, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the drip of Kellen's blood on the dirt. Marisol scrambled from her hiding place, rushing to his side. "You're hurt!" Her voice broke, panic rising in her throat. Kellen sank to one knee, his face pale but his eyes still fierce. When he looked at her, there was no fear, no regret, only a small, tired smile. "You see, Marisol?" he murmured, voice low, heavy with exhaustion. "They came for gold. But the only treasure I guard." He reached up, his bloodied hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Is you." Her breath caught, tears blurring her vision. The firelight danced across his strong frame, across the blood that streaked his skin, and in that moment, she saw him not as a captor, not even just as a protector, but as something more, something she could not yet name. The canyon lay quiet now, bodies cooling in the sand, the smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. And though the danger had passed, Marisol knew the battle had only begun, for gold still poisoned the land. And men would not stop coming. But so long as Kellen stood, so long as he breathed, she believed she would not face them alone. The canyon had fallen silent, except for the faint hiss of cooling gun barrels and the low crackle of a dying campfire. Dust hung in the air like smoke from an invisible pyre, and the metallic scent of blood mingled with the desert wind. The outlaws who had sought to use the girl as a bargaining chip now lay scattered in the dirt, their greed silenced forever. Kellen stood at the center of it all, his chest rising and falling like a war drum. Sweat slicked his bronzed skin, streaked with ash and blood that wasn't all his own. His tomahawk dripped red at the edge, and for a moment he did not move, only listened. His ears strained against the whisper of the night, seeking any sign of danger that still lurked in the shadows. The girl slowly emerged from her hiding place. Her skirts were torn, her face smudged with dust, but her eyes locked on him with a raw mix of fear and wonder. She had seen men fight before, drunken brawls in saloons, her father's fists slammed on tables, but never like this. Kellen had fought with the precision of a storm, every strike carrying purpose, every move radiating power. He hadn't been fighting only for himself. He had been fighting for her. Are they gone?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying. Against the canyon walls. Kellen turned his head, his black hair clinging to his damp skin, catching silver light from the moon. His gaze softened as it met hers. "They will not rise again." Relief rushed through her body, so fierce it made her knees buckle. She caught herself against the rock, but her breathing was uneven, her hands trembling. When Kellen stepped toward her, she flinched not because she feared him, but because the intensity of his presence was almost overwhelming. He crouched in front of her, his dark eyes steady. "You are unhurt?" She nodded, though her throat tightened with words she could not release. She wanted to tell him thank you, that she didn't deserve his protection, that no one had ever stood for her like that before. But the words dissolved. Under the weight of everything she had seen, Kellen reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch unexpectedly gentle for a man whose hands had just been instruments of war. "Your father traded you for gold," he said, his voice carrying neither judgment nor pity, only truth. But he was blind. He could not see what is beyond price. Her breath caught, her lips parting as if she might argue, but nothing came. Instead, she lowered her gaze, ashamed of the tears burning in her eyes. For 17 years, she had believed herself to be little more than a burden, something to be bartered, used, or cast aside. And yet this warrior, a stranger, looked at her as though she were something else entirely. Kellen rose and offered his hand. "Come," he said. "The night is not safe here. Others may follow." She slipped her small, trembling hand into his, and he pulled her to her feet. The warmth of his grip steadied her, stronger than any words could. Together they left the canyon, their shadows stretching long across the sand, painted by firelight and moonlight alike dot as they walked. The silence between them deepened into something sacred. The desert wind carried the sound of distant coyotes, the rustle of sagebrush, the hiss of shifting sand. Somewhere above, stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds. Cold and brilliant dot, at last, she found her voice. "Why did you save me?" Kellen did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his words were steady. "Because no map, no gold, No promise of power is worth the soul of the innocent. Your father gave you away. I will not. The girls. Throat tightened again, but this time with something warmer hope. She looked at him, at the way his broad shoulders moved with strength, at the way his long hair danced with the wind, at the calm certainty in his stride. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, and in that moment she began to believe that. Maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than the world had told her. The desert stretched before them, endless and uncertain. Danger still lay ahead, and the secrets of the gold her father sought were not yet finished with them. But as the girl walked beside Kellen, her heart steadied. For the first time, she did not feel alone, and for the first time, she dared to wonder. If she was more than a traded daughter, if perhaps in the eyes of the warrior, she was the real treasure. Kellen stood at the mouth of the canyon, the silver moon painting him in pale fire, his tomahawk heavy in his hand. His breath rattled in his chest, each inhale sharp from the cut along his ribs. The girl's small hand clung to his arm, steadying him as if her touch alone kept him upright. Ahead of them, in the valley, torches flickered like angry stars. Men on horseback hired guns, drifters, and desperate outlaws waited. And at the center, holding a rolled scrap of weathered hide high above his head, stood the man who had bartered away his own daughter's life, the girl's father. The sight of him struck Kellen harder than the bullet grazed at his side. He remembered the look on the man's face when he thrust her into strangers' arms, not with sorrow, but with relief like a burden cast off. Kellen's jaw tightened. A man who would trade flesh and blood for gold was worse than any outlaw. You came. The father called, his voice carrying across the stone and sand. You've done my part well, warrior. You kept her alive, and now you'll hand her back. The map will lead me to the gold, and you, he grinned like a wolf, you'll fade back into the desert, empty-handed. The girl pressed closer to Kellen, her breath quickening. Don't leave me, she whispered, her words so fragile. They could have been carried away on the night wind. Kellen looked down at her. Her eyes shimmered in the torchlight, not with fear alone, but with trust she had given him freely, without bargain or price. A trust worth more than any map. He dropped the tomahawk into the dust. Its thud cracked through the silence. The outlaws shifted uneasily, hands brushing gun handles. Kellen raised his hands slowly, palms open not in surrender, but in defiance. You call her a burden, he said, his voice low, rough as stone grinding against stone. But I call her treasure. No map in this world could match her worth. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the canyon. Then laughter burst from the father, cruel and sharp. Treasure? She's nothing. A mouth to feed, a weight to carry. The gold will buy me land, cattle, power. She cannot give me that. Kellen's eyes darkened. Gold cannot speak your name when you are gone. Gold cannot sit by your fire and listen. Gold cannot look at you with love. He placed a hand lightly on the girl's shoulder. She can. The father's grin faltered. Anger twisted his face. He raised a pistol, aiming not at Kellen, but at the girl. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Kellen moved like a storm breaking. With one arm, he pulled the girl behind him. With the other, he reached for his tomahawk. The pistol cracked, the bullet sparking off stone, but Kellen was already in motion, charging through dust and torchlight. His tomahawk arced, knocking the weapon from the man's hand. The father stumbled back, his eyes wide, his greed and bravado stripped bare. Kellen pinned him against the rock with nothing but his raw strength. You would kill your own blood. For gold? Kellen snarled. His voice thundered through the canyon. Then you deserve no treasure. He tore the weathered map from the man's fist, ripped it down the middle, and let the scraps scatter into the wind. Gasps rose from the outlaws, but none dared move. The girl clutched Kellen's side, trembling, but her eyes shone like stars. For the first time, she saw not just a warrior, but a man who had chosen her over everything else. The father slumped, defeated, his greed broken. The outlaws melted into the night, their torches snuffed one by one, leaving only the fire's faint glow and the moon's pale light. Kellen turned to the girl, kneeling despite the pain searing his ribs. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your father traded you away," he said softly. "But I will not. You are no bargain. You are no burden. You are treasure." Her small hands cupped his face, dirt-streaked but steady. "And you're my warrior." The desert. Wind rose, carrying the last tatters of the map into the stars. Somewhere out there, gold still slept beneath the earth, hidden and untouched. But here, in the hollow of the canyon, a different treasure was found, one forged in trust and sacrifice, and in the bond between a scarred warrior and a girl who was never meant to be discarded. Kellen stood again, lifting her gently into his arms. The firelight glowed against his chest, his jewelry glinting like ancient talismans. Together they walked out of the canyon, not toward gold, but toward something greater. And for the first time in many winters, the warrior felt whole.